Hi, everybody. My name's Haliash Khanajad. I work in the university's Office for Equal Opportunity. I'm here today to talk to you about the university's policies relating to discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual misconduct. There's a lot of important information. Unfortunately, we don't have enough time to cover all of it, so I'm just going to touch on some key pieces of information that would be helpful for you all to know. If you remember one thing from today, just remember the name of our office, Office for Equal Opportunity. We have a lot of information online, a lot of information about resources, and you can always contact us if you have any questions. In part, today we're going to discuss some topics that may be distressing to some students. We're going to talk about the university's response and responsibilities relating to sexual harassment and sexual misconduct. These can be distressing topics. If you need to take a moment to step out, feel free to do so, but also be aware that there are some confidential resources available to you if you need to talk to somebody. Cougar Health Services has medical and counseling service providers. Alternatives to Violence at the Palouse is a local victims advocacy agency that can provide you with confidential support, resources, referral, and help if you're going through any of these situations. Today we're going to start by talking off some rights that all of you have. I want to go through some policies very quickly, some definitions, and then some information on resources and support. In addition, as graduate students, you're going to have some responsibilities in your activities at the university, and we're going to go through those very briefly as well. There are a couple main policies at play here. Executive Policy 15 is WSU's policy prohibiting discrimination, sexual harassment, and sexual misconduct. That applies to everybody at the university, students, staff, faculty, visitors to the campus. It does reference some parts of the standards of conduct for students, so I have that up there as well. And then I'm just going to very briefly today touch on EP 28, Executive Policy 28, which is the policy on faculty, student, and supervisor-subordinate relationships. When we talk about discrimination at the university, WSU prohibits discrimination on the basis of what's called a protected class, a characteristic or trait, one of the ones that are listed here on this slide. So we have up there race, sex and gender, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, religion, age, color, creed, national or ethnic origin, physical, mental, or sensory disability, marital status, genetic information, and status as an honorably discharged veteran or member of the military. The main point here is that everybody in this room belongs to multiple protected classes. If you experience discrimination under one of these classes, you can come and speak to our office. On that slide, you'll notice that I have some of them in bold print under sex and gender. That's because the vast majority of complaints that we receive are related to concerns about discrimination related to sex and gender. Those are protected from discrimination through Title IX, which is a federal amendment. Title IX states that no person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. That's everything you do here at WSU should not experience discrimination based on sex and or gender. Before we dive into some of those definitions under that policy, I did want to briefly touch on EP 28 because it relates to some of these concerns. This is a policy on faculty, student, and supervisor-subordinate relationships. One, if you're in a supervisory position or you're working with somebody who has supervisory authority over you, it is not prohibited that you engage in a relationship. However, please be careful when you're approaching these. There is a potential for a power differential between the two people, where somebody may feel like they don't have a choice but to enter a relationship. If that's ever the case, you can come to our office. However, please know that if there is a consensual relationship, the only requirement there is that there is no supervisory authority between the two parties. So if you, for example, have authority over somebody that you're in a relationship with, you need to report that to Human Resource Services or your supervisors. Okay, diving back into the policy on discrimination, I want to go through some definitions just to make sure everybody understands what we're talking about here. When we talk about discrimination at the university, we're talking about conduct, actual behavior. That's different than prejudice, which is just a belief or an attitude that somebody is not acting upon. Discrimination is actual behavior, and it can include a couple of different kinds of behavior: disparate treatment, disparate or adverse impact, and harassment. Disparate treatment requires that somebody is intentionally discriminating. So for example, let's say somebody decided to only hire certain people because they're from their home country and they think that those people are smarter. That would be discrimination and disparate treatment. Disparate or adverse impact is non-intentional conduct that could have a discriminatory impact. So that could be somebody schedules a meeting in a location that's not ADA accessible, where somebody who needs an ADA entrance can't access the room. That maybe they didn't intend to do that, but they've caused this different impact on that person. And then finally, harassment, and this is the key one that we're going to focus on today. This is where we see the most concerns. That's a form of discrimination that it can be verbal, written, or physical, that's sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive, that it's causing a person to have problems in their working, academic, or living environment. So one form that falls under Title IX is sexual harassment. So that's a form of discrimination based on sex and gender. It's conduct that's sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive, and it can include things like comments of a sexual nature, sexually explicit statements, questions, jokes, or anecdotes. Quid pro quo harassment, that's this for that, meaning somebody offers you a promotion in exchange for a sexual benefit. Unwelcome sexual advances, harassment of a non-sexual nature that's based on a person's sex and or gender, so treating somebody poorly just because they're male or female. Harassment based on a person's non-conformity with sex and or gender stereotypes. The one key thing here I want to point out is that we are in a very diverse environment. We have a lot of people from different backgrounds. Everybody has a different level of comfort with conversations. Keep that in mind as you're proceeding in your studies here. Some conversations that you're having you may find offensive. They may not rise to this level, but it doesn't mean that it's appropriate or professional, and so we need to make sure that we're appropriately dealing with those as they come up. Another form of sexual harassment is sex and gender-based violence. This is an extreme form of sexual harassment. It can include things like non-consensual sexual contact. That includes sexual assault or rape, sexual exploitation, domestic violence and dating violence, and stalking. Any instance of these is considered sufficiently severe, persistent, or pervasive. A couple key definitions for you, and so that we all understand these. Stalking would be a course of conduct directed to a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or the safety of others, fear for harm to their property or the property of others, or suffer substantial emotional distress. Relationship violence, that's also referred to as intimate partner violence or domestic violence. That can be physical violence, emotional abuse, verbal violence, economic threats, or psychological abuse. That can be actions or actual threats of actions that would influence or harm an intimate partner. And then finally, sexual exploitation. That occurs when a person takes non-consensual or abusive sexual advantage of another. Where we tend to see that in our community is through people posting photographs, intimate photographs of ex-partners, or using a cell phone to take a photo underneath a bathroom stall or something like that. If that happens, please report that to our office or to the police. When we talk about non-consensual sexual contact, a lot of students ask us questions about, well, what does consent actually mean? And there's a specific standard that WSU has that we follow when people make complaints relating to this. So consent to sexual activity needs to be clear, knowing, and voluntary. It needs to be actual words or conduct that demonstrate clear permission. So it can't just be silence or passivity, okay? Consent can be given or taken away at any time during a sexual engagement. That includes that if somebody initially agrees to sexual activity, but then during the sexual activity decides that they no longer want to participate, then that consent no longer exists. And finally, consent can't be present if a person lacks the mental capacity to be able to understand the nature or consequences of the act. So if somebody doesn't understand the who, what, when, where, why, and how of what's going on, either due to alcohol, drugs, physical disability, or some other reason, they wouldn't be able to provide consent. When we have reports of sex and gender-based violence, so things like sexual assault, stalking, domestic violence, WSU can address those whether or not they occur on campus if the continuing effects have the ability to return to campus. So if it's students that are out at an off-campus apartment and something happens and they still have to come to campus every day and see each other, WSU could address that. Our process is a university process. It can be pursued simultaneously with a criminal or investigative process. So if you wanted to report to our office, you could do that. You could also report to the police. You could report to both or one or the other or none at all. It's totally up to you. Throughout these processes, there's a lot of resources available to you. I'm going to touch on them very briefly. If you have any questions about any of these resources, if you have questions about what we're talking about today, please know that we do have a booth over there. You could chat with Cheryl Rose or Raleigh Hansen. Some confidential resources that are available to you. If you want to talk to somebody and not have anybody know about what you're talking about, you can go to Cougar Health Services, Alternatives to Violence at the Palouse, or Pullman Regional Hospital. There are also campus resources available to you. Some of the key ones that students access regularly are the Dean of Students Office. If you have questions about your academics or how to approach something, you need help with a withdrawal or an incomplete, that's the office that can help you with that. The Office of Student Conduct, the Graduate School, and the Office of the University Ombudsman are also all available to you if you have to talk with somebody about your concerns. Like I said, we're going through a lot of information. Please know, if you remember our website, oeo.wsu.edu, we have a whole list of resources there, one for each campus, so you can go and find the people to talk to in your area. Now, I want to focus on my office for just a brief moment here. If you wanted to file a complaint relating to discrimination or sexual misconduct, you can come and file a complaint with our office. We're the primary intake office for those types of complaints. You can also, of course, report to police. There are a couple other resources for reporting as well on campus. These all funnel back to my office, but you can also report to the Title IX coordinator, who's Kimberly Anderson. She's the director of my office. There are also deputy Title IX coordinators, Dr. Kathy McKay in the Dean of Students Office, Ann McCoy in athletics, and then each campus has its own Title IX liaison, and those are listed on our website. If you were to report to our office, know that you're going to receive care, support, understanding, that we're going to help you facilitate resources, that there may be interim measures in place to help you while we're investigating conduct. So if you need some sort of special help to make sure that you're still successful in your school while we're looking into some conduct, those may be available to you. There's going to be well-trained investigators, trauma-informed interviews, and our process is a neutral investigative process. What that process looks like is, if you share information with our office, we're going to look at that information and determine how we can best help. One of those ways that we function is by conducting a formal investigation, which means we send notice to the person who's accused of misconduct. We interview witnesses, we conduct a complete investigation, and then produce a report of our findings, which you would receive a copy of, as well as the responding parties and any supervisors, human resource services, or Office of Student Conduct that needs to be involved. Throughout that process, there's a lot of checks and balances. There is an opportunity for hearings or appeals processes. If you ever have any questions about this, you can come and talk to us. One thing I always share with graduate students, students are often afraid to share information with us because they're afraid they're going to be retaliated against, particularly where you're in a small academic field and there are limited people that you can rely on for references. Please know that retaliation is prohibited. That doesn't necessarily mean we can put a protective bubble around you, but if somebody were to retaliate against you, the university would take swift action to address that. And there may also be other options available to you. For example, we could help facilitate getting additional references or some other resources that you might need. A couple of responsibilities for you all. First off, please know that you're part of these policies and we rely on you to help uphold our mission and our values here at WSU. But you also have some specific reporting requirements. If you have any type of employment at the university, so if you're receiving any type of funding from the university, you may have reporting requirements, and that could include things like if you hear about sexual harassment or sexual misconduct, you do need to report that to our office. The only exceptions to that are folks that are statutorily barred from doing that. So if you were in counseling services or providing medical services, or if you're in a violence prevention education program, or if you're at a position that there's no authority to take action in that role, you may not need to, but most employees are required to report this to our office. So if you're speaking with another student, if you're a TA in a class and a student comes to you and shares information relating to sexual harassment or sexual misconduct, please know you have to share that with our office. Additionally, if you have any supervisory authority whatsoever, you have to share all incidents of discrimination with our office. And please know that you're not to investigate those allegations. So if somebody says, hey, so-and-so did this to me, it's not your job to go out and ask those questions. We have some trained investigators in our office that can take that role for you. The other thing I think it's important for you all to know is how to be knowledgeable about the responsibilities here at the university, your reporting requirements. We're doing a quick training right now, but just know there is additional training available to you if you want more information about this. On our website, we have an education and training page. There's a form there that you can fill out to request additional trainings. There's also some online trainings available to you. There's sample syllabus language on our website that's related to our discrimination policy if you're helping TA a class. There's a whole slew of resources. And I've also included some additional trainings down here if you're interested. There's a green dot training that's available through through Cougar Health Services. It's a violence prevention program that helps train you to be a good community member and address sexual misconduct and harassment as it's happening to make sure that we're all keeping each other safe. And then there's also an ally training through GSORC, the Gender Identity Expression and Sexual Orientation Resource Training Center, that can provide scheduled trainings on request for our campus community members. Very last bit here, I know I'm running short on time, but I want to briefly touch on accommodations here at the university. If you're not aware of what an accommodation is simply a modification or adjustment to the tasks, environments, or the way things are usually done that would enable individuals with disabilities to have an equal opportunity to participate in an academic program. That means that you as students have access to the accommodation process. If you have a physical, mental, or sensory disability, including the use of a trained service animal, you can request an accommodation either through the Access Center or a disability services provider on your campus or through the Disability Services Office and Human Resource Services. And they can help find out if there's any accommodations that will help you be successful in your role. Just a quick example of what that might look like: if you have a learning disability and you benefit from extended time on tests or something like that, this may be a good resource for you. But please also be aware, if you have any type of teaching responsibilities, you may also interact with students who have accommodations. Just be aware that if they're bringing you information about accommodations that have been processed through one of the university's access centers or disability services provider, that means that those people have already determined that that's an appropriate accommodation. If you have concerns about that accommodation and its impact on the educational aspects of your course, you can contact the access center to share those concerns with them. It's typically best to communicate directly with them to make sure that you're understanding that process fully. So again, if you have any questions, contact the Access Center or Human Resource Services, Disability Services. On some of the other campuses, on the Vancouver campus, it's called an Access Center as well. On some of the other campuses, there's a disability services provider within Student Affairs. And that's all for me today. Does anyone have any questions? So the question was, if you're on a research assistantship and a friend tells you something relating to Title IX, do you have to report it? If your friend is telling you while you're out doing friend things, that's probably not somebody looking to you as an employee of the university. However, if you're on campus and you're working in your area, in your lab or your office, and somebody comes to you and says, hey, this just happened to me, you are an employee at that point, and it is your responsibility to report it. If you're concerned about your wanting to be confidential for people who are coming to you, one thing we ask people to do is to let folks know that you're not a confidential resource. If somebody shares that with you, you're going to report it. It doesn't necessarily mean that something crazy is going to happen at the university. If you report it to our office, the first thing that we do is we just send resources and reporting information to the person who needs it, and it's up to them to decide if they want to come and speak with us. Okay. Any other questions? No, so if you receive a report from somebody, we like you to send it to us as quickly as possible. There isn't an exact timeline to do so, though. If you need to follow up with that student or that employee and just say, hey, I just want you to know, when you told me this, I had kind of forgotten that I was not a confidential resource and I do need to report this, we would give you the opportunity to do that. Okay. I can't quite hear you. Can you speak up?
So one thing is sometimes when you report something, consider that you're escalating it by reporting it that something big is going to happen that might happen in the university or something. So sometimes people will try to resolve it. What do you suggest?
Yeah. That's a great question. So the question was whether or not when you're reporting, are you escalating it or should you try and resolve it internally? If it's related to one of our policies, we do ask that you report and that you can consult with us. There's a lot of things that come to our office that don't necessarily need a formal investigative process and the department or the people involved can address internally, but we can help you with best practices on how to address that. Any other questions? Okay, thank you all for giving us the opportunity to speak with you today. If you have any questions, you can always contact us. Thanks.